The blood-red sun dipped below the jagged mountains as Willow Porter stared at the charred remains of Independence, California, her honey-blonde hair whipping across her tear-stained face. The year was 1875, and everything she had known was gone, consumed by a fire that had ravaged the mining town while she was delivering supplies to a family in the hills. "Everyone's gone," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the howling wind that scattered ash across the desolate Main Street. A tall figure emerged from the shadows, his weathered face partially concealed by a dust-covered Stetson. Vaughn Valentin approached slowly, his spurs jingling with each deliberate step. He'd been out tracking a band of outlaws when the fire struck, returning to find devastation where prosperity once flourished. "Then we'll start counting from 2, he said, his deep voice steady as he removed his hat and stood beside her. Willow turned to face him, her green eyes reflecting confusion mingled with the faintest glimmer of hope. "What do you mean?" "I mean you ain't alone, Miss Porter." Vaughn's azure eyes held her gaze. "Whatever happened here, whatever comes next, there's 2 of us now." She barely knew this man, the mysterious cowboy who'd arrived in Independence 3 months ago, taking odd jobs and keeping to himself. Some said he was running from something. Others claimed he was a bounty hunter. All Willow knew was that in a world suddenly empty, his presence felt like an anchor in a turbulent sea. "My father's store," Willow said, her voice breaking as she gestured toward a pile of smoldering timber that once housed Porter's general goods. "My home. Everything." Vaughn placed his hat back on his head and surveyed the destruction. "We can't stay here tonight. Fire might reignite and there's nothing left worth saving. I know a place up in the foothills. We can rest there, figure things out come morning." Willow hesitated, clutching the leather satchel that contained all she had left in the world, a few personal items, some money, and her father's pocket watch. Thomas Porter had died last winter, leaving his 22-year-old daughter to manage the store alone. Now even that was gone. "I don't know if I can leave," she said, her voice small. "What if someone comes back? What if there are survivors?" Vaughn's expression softened slightly, though his jaw remained tense. "I rode through the whole town before finding you, checked every building that was still standing. If anyone else survived, they've already gone." He paused, then added more gently, "We can leave a sign in case someone returns, but we need shelter and fresh water, Miss Porter, and you need rest." The logic of his words penetrated her shock. Willow nodded slowly, then followed him to where his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, was tethered nearby. Vaughn's skilled hands helped her mount, then he swung up behind her. The warmth of his chest against her back provided an unexpected comfort as they rode away from the ruins of Independence. They traveled in silence through the gathering darkness, climbing steadily into the Sierra foothills. The moon rose, casting silver light across the rugged landscape. After nearly an hour, they approached a small cabin nestled among towering pines. "Is this yours?" Willow asked as they dismounted. Vaughn shook his head. "Belongs to a prospector named Miller. He's working a claim near the Nevada line. Told me I could use it if needed." He led his horse to a small lean-to stable, unsaddled him efficiently, and provided water and feed. Willow stood watching, her body suddenly heavy with exhaustion. When Vaughn approached the cabin door, she followed wordlessly. Inside, the cabin was spare but clean: a small table with 2 chairs, a cast-iron stove, simple cupboards, a narrow bed in one corner, and a rocking chair near the stone fireplace. Vaughn moved with surprising efficiency, lighting a lantern and starting a fire in the stove. "You should rest," he said, nodding toward the bed. "I'll take the floor." Willow shook her head. "I can't take your friend's bed while you sleep on the floor." "It ain't up for debate, Miss Porter." His voice was firm but not unkind. "You've had a shock, need proper rest." Too exhausted to argue, Willow removed her boots and lay down, still fully clothed. The events of the day crashed over her in waves: the ordinary morning at the store, the routine delivery to the Reynolds family in the hills, the horrifying sight of smoke on her return, and then nothing. Everything gone. Tears slid silently down her cheeks as she faced the wall. Behind her, she could hear Vaughn moving quietly, preparing a bedroll on the floor. The gentle domesticity of his movements eventually lulled her into uneasy sleep. Morning arrived with harsh clarity. For a blessed moment upon waking, Willow forgot the devastation, but reality crashed back as she opened her eyes to the unfamiliar cabin. She sat up to find Vaughn already awake, coffee brewing on the stove. "There's water in that basin if you want to wash," he said. Nodding toward a table near the window, Willow smoothed her rumpled dress and approached the basin, splashing cool water on her face and neck. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything." Vaughn merely nodded, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. He handed one to her, then sat at the table studying a worn map spread before him. "What happened yesterday?" she asked, joining him at the table. "How did the fire start?" Vaughn's expression darkened. "Don't think it was an accident." "What do you mean?" "Been hearing rumors. Cattlemen from over Bridgeport way wanting to run a rail spur through here. Town council refused to sell the land rights." Willow's hands tightened around her cup. "You're saying someone burned Independence intentionally, but that's murder." "That's business," Vaughn replied grimly. "At least to some men." "We need to tell the authorities," Willow insisted, rising from her chair. Vaughn regarded her steadily. "Nearest marshal's in Bodie, 3-day ride and without proof." "Then we'll find proof." Her voice rose with determination, grief transforming into anger. "We can't just let them get away with this." "And we won't," he assured her, his calm voice contrasting with the hard glint in his eyes. "But first we need a plan, supplies, information." Willow sank back into her chair, the enormity of their situation settling over her like a weight. "What's left for me now?" she whispered, more to herself than to him. Vaughn was silent for a long moment, then spoke with unexpected gentleness. "There's a stage that runs through Mammoth, about 15 miles south. Could take you to Sacramento, maybe start fresh there." The suggestion sparked something in Willow, not hope exactly, but purpose. "No," she said firmly. "I'm not running. Independence was my home. My father built that store from nothing after the war. I won't just abandon it." A hint of respect flickered across Vaughn's features. "Then what do you propose?" "We rebuild." She straightened her shoulders. "We find out who did this, bring them to justice, and we rebuild." Vaughn studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "That's a tall order for just 2 people, Miss Porter." "Then we'll find more," she replied with newfound resolve. "You said it yourself, we'll start counting from 2. Their eyes locked across the table, hers bright with determination, his cautious but warming with what might have been admiration. In that moment, something shifted between them, a silent understanding forming as surely as the morning light spilling through the cabin windows. After a simple breakfast of hardtack and dried beef, they rode back to the ruins of Independence. The devastation looked even worse in daylight: skeletal remains of buildings, charred timber, and the occasional glint of metal or glass catching the sunlight. Willow fought back tears as they dismounted near what had been the town square. "We should look for survivors first," she said, tying her hair back with a strip of ribbon. Vaughn nodded. "I'll check the south side. You take the north. Meet back here in an hour." They separated, each picking carefully through the ruins. Willow called out periodically, hoping for a response, but only silence answered. She found a few salvageable items: a cast iron pan, some tools, a partially burned Bible which she collected in a burlap sack, but no survivors. When they reconvened, Vaughn's expression told her he'd had no better luck. "Found some tracks heading east," he reported. "Maybe a dozen people. Looks like they left in a hurry during the fire." "The mine workers," Willow said, hope flaring. "They would have been coming off shift when the fire started. Maybe they got out." "Could be," Vaughn agreed, though his tone suggested he didn't share her optimism. They spent the rest of the morning searching methodically, eventually confirming what they both feared: no survivors remained in Independence. By midday, they had gathered what useful items they could salvage and loaded them onto Vaughn's horse. "What now?" Willow asked as they stood at the edge of town, looking back at the destruction. "We need supplies," Vaughn said pragmatically. "And information. Mammoth's our best bet." "Will you take me there?" Willow asked, suddenly aware of how dependent she was on this near stranger. Vaughn studied her face for a moment. "I will, but there's something you should know first." He removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. "I didn't come to Independence by accident." Willow tensed. "What do you mean?" "I've been tracking a man. Name's Harlan Reed. He's the foreman for the Bridgeport Cattle Company." Vaughn's voice hardened. 3 months ago, he and his men burned a settlement north of here when the residents refused to sell. Killed 12 people. "And you think he's behind this too?" Vaughn nodded grimly. "I was getting close." "Think that's why they moved fast?" "Are you a lawman?" Willow asked, realizing how little she knew about him. "Was U.S. Marshal out of Denver." His eyes grew distant. "Left the badge behind after Reed's men killed my partner," understanding dawned. "So this is personal?" "Yes." He looked directly at her. "Which is why you should take that stage from Mammoth. This isn't your fight." Willow's chin lifted defiantly. "Those people were my neighbors, Mr. Valentin. My friends. If what you say is true, then this Reed made it my fight when he burned my town." Something like admiration flickered in Vaughn's eyes. "It'll be dangerous." "I'm aware," she replied, her green eyes steady, "but I'm coming with you." Vaughn studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "All right then. To Mammoth." The journey to Mammoth took the better part of a day. They arrived as the sun was setting, the small mining settlement bustling with activity despite the late hour. Miners fresh off shift crowded the saloon, while shopkeepers closed up for the day and families retreated to their homes. Vaughn secured them rooms at the modest hotel, separate accommodations that stretched Willow's limited funds, but maintained proprieties. They agreed to meet for dinner in the hotel's small dining room after refreshing themselves. When Willow descended the stairs, she had washed away the soot and grime of Independence, changed into her one spare dress, and pinned her honey blonde hair into a simple but elegant arrangement. Vaughn, waiting at a corner table, stood as she approached. He too had cleaned up, his dark hair still damp, his face freshly shaved except for a neatly trimmed mustache. "You look," he began, then seemed to think better of whatever he'd been about to say. "Feeling better, as well as can be expected," she replied, taking the seat he offered. "What's our plan?" Vaughn waited until the waitress had taken their order before leaning forward. "First, we gather information. Reed's men might have been seen passing through. Then we need supplies: food, ammunition, maybe horses." "With what money?" Willow asked practically. "I have some saved, but not enough for all that." Vaughn reached into his vest and extracted a folded document. "This is a federal warrant for Reed's arrest. There's a reward, $500. Should cover what we need and then some." Willow studied the paper with its official seals and signatures. "You're still acting as a marshal." "No," he corrected firmly. "I'm acting as a man seeking justice. The warrant just makes it legal." Their food arrived simple fare of beef stew and fresh bread that nonetheless tasted like a feast after their meager breakfast. As they ate, Vaughn explained more about Reed and the Bridgeport Cattle Company. They're backed by Eastern Money Railroad interests. Been buying up land all across the Eastern Sierra. Those who won't sell have had accidents, like fires, Willow said bitterly, among other things, poisoned wells, cattle stampeded through crops, whatever it takes. And no one stops them. Vaughn's expression hardened. Laws spread thin out here, and money talks. Local sheriffs look the other way, judges get paid off. So it's just us, Willow said quietly. For now, Vaughn agreed, his blue eyes meeting hers across the table. But two determined people can accomplish a lot, Miss Porter. After dinner, they separated Vaughn to the saloon to listen for information, Willow to the general store before it closed. They agreed to meet at breakfast to share what they learned. The next morning, Willow arrived in the dining room first, securing a private corner table. When Vaughn joined her, his expression was grim but determined. Reed was here, he said without preamble. Left yesterday morning with 6 men. They were buying supplies, asking questions about silver claims near Independence. Setting up their story, Willow realized. They'll claim they had nothing to do with the fire, that they only arrived afterward to stake mining claims. Vaughn nodded. Exactly. What about you? Learn anything useful? I did, Willow replied, opening her small notebook. I spoke with the storekeeper's wife. Apparently, Reed and his men have been through here several times in recent months. Always the same pattern: they arrive, ask questions about who owns what land, then move on. A few weeks later, there's trouble wherever they've been. Trouble, accidents, fires, claim jumping. She turned a page in her notebook. And there's more. The stage driver who came through yesterday reported that a group of men from Independence reached Alancha. They're safe, at least. Relief flooded Vaughn's features. That's good news. How many? About 15 men, a few women and children. Miners and their families, mostly. Willow closed her notebook. The driver said they told a story about armed men starting the fire, then shooting at anyone who tried to flee west toward Bridgeport. Vaughn's jaw tightened. That's Reed's signature. He likes to herd people in the direction he wants them to go, makes it look like they all fled rather than being murdered. The brutality of it made Willow's stomach turn. So what's our next move? We follow them, Vaughn said simply. I've secured horses and supplies. We can leave within the hour. Where are we headed? North. According to what I heard, Reed and his men are making for the high country. There's an old hunting lodge near Twin Lakes where they hole up between jobs. Willow nodded, a newfound determination coursing through her. I'll be ready. True to her word, Willow was waiting at the livery stable 45 minutes later, dressed in practical riding clothes she'd purchased at the general store: sturdy trousers, a flannel shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat to shield her face from the sun. Vaughn raised an eyebrow but made no comment about her masculine attire. Ever fired one of these? He asked instead, presenting her with a Winchester repeating rifle. Willow accepted the weapon confidently. My father taught me, said a woman alone in mining country needed to protect herself. Smart man, Vaughn remarked, showing her how to secure the rifle to her saddle. We'll ride north through the pass, then cut west toward Twin Lakes. 2 days' journey, maybe 3. As they rode out of Mammoth, Willow cast one last glance over her shoulder at the settlement. Ahead lay uncertainty and danger, but also the possibility of justice. Beside her rode a man she barely knew but whose presence gave her a strange sense of security. Mr. Valentin, she said as they settled into a steady pace along the mountain trail. I realize I never properly thanked you. For staying, for helping me. Vaughn kept his eyes on the trail ahead. No need for thanks, doing what anyone would do. No, Willow disagreed. Not anyone. Most would have suggested I take that stage to Sacramento and been done with it. He was quiet for several moments. Guess I recognize something in you, Miss Porter. Same thing that keeps me going after Reed. Determination. Won't quit till justice is served. Call me Willow, she said impulsively. If we're going to face danger together, formalities seem unnecessary. Vaughn glanced at her, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. Willow, he repeated, as if testing the sound. Then I suppose you should call me Vaughn. Vaughn, she echoed, and something shifted between them, a small but significant step from strangers toward something more akin to partners. They rode steadily through the day, climbing higher into the Sierra Nevada. The June weather held fair, though at these elevations, the air carried a crisp chill even in summer. They stopped only briefly to rest the horses and eat a cold lunch before continuing. By late afternoon, they had reached a high meadow ringed with ancient pines. A small stream cut through the center, its clear water glinting in the late sunlight. We'll camp here, Vaughn decided, dismounting smoothly. Good water for the horses, sheltered position. Willow slid from her horse with considerably less grace, her muscles protesting the long hours in the saddle. She tried not to wince as she stretched, but Vaughn noticed. Not used to riding all day, he asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. I'll manage, she replied stiffly, leading her mare to the stream. Vaughn efficiently set up camp while Willow gathered firewood. As twilight descended, they sat beside a small, carefully banked fire, eating beans and salt pork heated in Vaughn's trail skillet. The night sounds of the high country surrounded them, the rustle of wind through pines, the occasional call of a night bird, the persistent gurgle of the stream. Tell me about Reed, Willow said after they had eaten. Why is he doing this? Vaughn stared into the fire, his expression distant. He's a hired gun, plain and simple. Works for whoever pays the most. Right now, that's the Bridgeport Cattle Company, but he's left bodies across 4 states that I know of. How did you become involved? Vaughn was silent for so long that Willow thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. I was assigned to investigate land disputes in Colorado Territory. Reports of settlers being forced out, homesteads burned. My partner Joe and I tracked the trouble to Reed. He paused, poking at the fire with a stick. We were close to making an arrest when they ambushed us outside Denver. Joe took 3 bullets meant for me, died in my arms. I'm so sorry, Willow said softly. Vaughn nodded once, acknowledging her sympathy. Reed disappeared after that, turned up 6 months later working for Bridgeport. I've been tracking him ever since. What will you do when you find him? His eyes, reflecting the firelight, met hers across the flames. Bring him to justice. And if that's not possible, it will be, he said with quiet certainty. They lapsed into silence. Willow watched him covertly as he cleaned their few utensils and secured the food away from wildlife. His movements were efficient, practiced those of a man accustomed to surviving alone in harsh country. Yet there was something else about him that intrigued her. A decency, perhaps. A core of honor beneath the hard exterior. When it came time to sleep, Vaughn unrolled their bedding on opposite sides of the fire. I'll take first watch, he said. Wake you in 4 hours. You don't have to stand guard, Willow protested. Surely we're safe enough here. Never assume safety, he replied, checking his revolver before settling against a fallen log. Too many good people have died that way. Willow wanted to argue but recognized the wisdom in his caution. She crawled into her bedroll, surprised by how comfortable the simple arrangement felt after the previous night in a proper bed. The star-scattered sky above, the whispering pines around them, and Vaughn's steady presence nearby combined to create an unexpected sense of peace. She was almost asleep when his voice came softly through the darkness. "Willow." "Yes." "What will you do after we find Reed, after justice is served?" The question caught her off guard. She hadn't thought beyond the immediate goal of finding Reed and proving he was responsible for destroying independence. "I don't know," she admitted. "Rebuild, I suppose. It's what my father would have done." "Independence might not be safe for a while," he said carefully. "Even with Reed gone, the company that hired him will still want that land." "Then I'll fight them too," she said with quiet determination. "Independence is my home." Vaughn made a sound that might have been admiration. "Get some sleep. Long ride tomorrow." Willow closed her eyes, but her mind remained active, turning over the events that had brought her here, sleeping under the stars with a former lawman, pursuing the men who had destroyed everything she knew. If someone had described this scenario to her a week ago, she would have laughed in disbelief. Now it felt like the only path forward. When Vaughn woke her for her watch, the night was deep and still. The fire burned down to embers. He showed her how to maintain the fire at just the right level, enough for warmth, but not so bright as to make them visible from a distance. Then he settled into his bedroll, asleep almost instantly. Willow watched him in the dim firelight, struck by how different he looked in sleep, younger, less burdened. The stern lines of his face softened, making her wonder about the man he had been before grief and vengeance shaped him. Dawn arrived with a chorus of birdsong and the soft glow of light filtering through the pines. Vaughn was already up, boiling coffee in a small pot when Willow awoke. She joined him by the fire, accepting a tin cup of the strong brew gratefully. "Sleep well?" he asked, his voice still rough with sleep. "Better than I expected," she admitted. "Though I kept thinking I heard things during my watch." "Probably did. Mountain lions hunt these ridges, maybe deer too." They broke camp efficiently and were on the trail as the sun cleared the eastern mountains. The day's journey took them higher still, through rocky passes where the horses picked their way carefully along narrow trails. By mid-afternoon, they had reached a vantage point that offered a spectacular view of the valley below. Vaughn pulled up his horse and dismounted, taking out a small brass spyglass. He scanned the distant terrain methodically, finally focusing on something that made him frown. "What is it?" Willow asked, joining him at the edge of the lookout. "Smoke," he said, handing her the spyglass. "About 10 miles northwest. Twin Lakes is in that direction." Willow peered through the glass, spotting the thin column of smoke rising into the clear air. Reed and his men, likely. Vaughn took back the spyglass, collapsing it and returning it to his saddlebag. "We'll approach from the east through those woods. Better cover." They continued on, the trail descending gradually toward a heavily forested slope. As they rode, Vaughn outlined his plan in low, measured tones. "The lodge is an old trapper's cabin, expanded over the years. Sits on a rise overlooking the smaller of the two lakes. One main building, a couple of outbuildings. Reed will have posted guards." "How many men total?" "6 with Reed, based on what I heard in Mammoth. Maybe more if others have joined them." Willow's stomach tightened with apprehension. "That's a lot of guns against just 2 of us." "We have surprise on our side," Vaughn pointed out, "and we're not looking to take them all, just Reed." "And how exactly do we manage that?" Vaughn gave her a sidelong glance. "We wait until dark, observe their routine, find the right moment." The simplicity of his plan did little to ease Willow's anxiety, but she nodded as if it made perfect sense. They rode in silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts as the sun began its westward descent. By late afternoon, they had reached the eastern shore of the smaller Twin Lake. Vaughn led them into a dense stand of pines well back from the water, where they dismounted and secured the horses. "We go on foot from here," he said, checking his revolver before tucking it into his holster. "Stay low, stay quiet." Willow nodded, her heart pounding as she followed him through the underbrush. They moved slowly, careful to avoid breaking branches or disturbing the forest floor. After nearly an hour of cautious progress, Vaughn held up a hand, signaling her to stop. He pointed silently through the trees. In a small clearing ahead stood a substantial log structure, the hunting lodge. Smoke rose from its stone chimney, and several horses were tethered to a rail near what appeared to be a stable. A man with a rifle paced slowly around the perimeter of the clearing. Vaughn motioned for Willow to retreat. They backtracked several yards before he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. 7 horses, 1 guard visible, others likely inside. "What now?" Willow whispered back. "We wait for nightfall, watch their movements, learn their patterns." They found a secluded spot with a view of the lodge and settled in to wait. As dusk deepened into night, lamps were lit inside the lodge, their glow spilling through the windows into the gathering darkness. The guard was relieved by another man, who took up the same patrol route around the clearing. Through the open windows, they could occasionally hear bursts of laughter or the raised voices of men arguing, though individual words were indistinguishable at this distance. Once, a door opened, spilling yellow lamplight across the clearing as a man stepped out to relieve himself against a tree before returning inside. "That was Raid," Vaughn murmured, his body tensing beside her. Willow strained to recall the man's features in the brief moment he'd been visible. "How can you be sure?" "I'd know him anywhere," Vaughn replied, his voice flat. "Spent 2 years hunting him." They continued their surveillance as the night deepened. The second guard was replaced by a third, who proved less diligent than his predecessors. Instead of patrolling, he settled on a stump near the front door, occasionally taking swigs from a flask. "He's our opportunity," Vaughn whispered. "When he makes his rounds, we move closer." But the guard seemed disinclined to move from his comfortable position. After nearly an hour, the lodge door opened again, and a different man emerged. "Hicks, get your lazy ass moving," the newcomer growled. "Boss says check the perimeter." The guard Hicks grumbled but stood, tucking his flask inside his jacket before slouching off into the darkness. "Now," Vaughn breathed. Already moving forward in a silent crouch, Willow followed, her heart hammering so loudly she feared it might give them away. They skirted the edge of the clearing, using the shadows cast by the towering pines as cover. When they reached the side of the lodge, Vaughn pressed his back against the rough logs, gesturing for Willow to do the same. They could hear the men clearly now, coarse laughter, the clink of glasses, snippets of conversation about easy pickings and those fools in Independence. Willow's blood boiled at the casual way they discussed destroying her home. Vaughn inched toward a window, raising his head just enough to peer inside. Willow watched his expression harden as he surveyed the room's occupants. After a moment, he ducked down again. "Reed's at the table with 4 others," he whispered. "Playing cards, 2 more by the fire." "What's the plan?" Willow asked, fear and determination warring within her. "I'm going in through the front. You stay here." "That's suicide," she protested. 7 against 1. 8, he corrected grimly. "Guard will be back soon, and I've faced worse odds." "At least let me help," Willow insisted. "I can create a diversion." Vaughn studied her face in the darkness, clearly weighing the risk against the potential advantage. Finally, he nodded. "When you hear my signal, 3 shots, set fire to the stable." "Fire," Willow repeated, alarmed. "Just enough smoke to draw attention. No need to endanger the horses." He reached into his pocket and produced a small box of matches. "Use these. Wait for my signal." Before she could respond, he melted into the shadows, circling toward the front of the lodge. Willow remained frozen against the wall, matches clutched in her hand, her pulse racing. The minutes stretched interminably as she waited. Inside, the men's voices grew louder, an argument about cards escalating. Then came the sound she'd been dreading, the creak of the front door opening, followed by Vaughn's deep voice. "Evening, gentlemen. Nobody move." A moment of stunned silence, then chaos erupted: shouts, the scrape of chairs, the unmistakable click of guns being cocked. Willow pressed herself harder against the wall, straining to hear what was happening. "Well, if it ain't the marshal from Denver," a new voice drawled. "Reed," she presumed. "Thought you'd given up the chase." "You murdered my partner," Vaughn replied, his voice deadly calm, "and a town full of innocent people." "Business is business," Reed replied dismissively. "Nothing personal." "It's personal to me," Vaughn countered. A tense silence followed, then Reed spoke again, his tone mocking. "You're outnumbered, Valentin. Even you can't take all of us." "Don't need to," Vaughn replied. "Just need you." What happened next unfolded with terrifying speed. 3 shots rang out in rapid succession, Vaughn's signal followed immediately by the sounds of struggle and more gunfire. Willow, jolted into action, ran toward the stable, the box of matches clutched in her trembling hand. Inside, the horses whinnied nervously at her sudden appearance. She located a pile of straw in the corner, struck a match, and set it ablaze. The dry straw caught quickly, sending up a plume of smoke. Willow waited just long enough to ensure the fire was burning steadily but not spreading to the structure, then ran back toward the lodge. The scene that greeted her was chaos. Men poured from the front door, shouting about fire. In the confusion, she glimpsed Vaughn grappling with a heavy-set man near the porch steps. Reed, she assumed. Both had lost their guns in the struggle and were trading blows with savage intensity. Willow searched desperately for a way to help. Her gaze fell on an abandoned rifle leaning against the porch railing. She darted forward, seized it, and fired a shot into the air. "Enough!" she shouted, leveling the rifle at Reed's head when both men froze at the unexpected gunshot. Reed stared at her in disbelief, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone who lived in Independence," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Understanding dawned in Reed's eyes, followed by a sneering laugh. "Another one with a grudge." "This your woman, Valentin? Didn't figure you for the type to hide behind skirts." Vaughn answered with a vicious right hook that sent Reed stumbling backward. Before the larger man could recover, Vaughn had drawn a knife from his boot and pressed it to Reed's throat. "It's over," he said, his voice cold. "You're going to confess to what you did in Independence and in Colorado." Reed's eyes darted from Vaughn to Willow, calculation clear in their depths. "And if I don't, then you die here," Vaughn said simply. "Your choice." Around them, Reed's men had realized the stable fire was a diversion and were regrouping, weapons drawn. Willow swung the rifle toward them. "Tell them to drop their guns," she ordered Reed, "or my friend here will open your throat." For a tense moment, Reed seemed to be weighing his options. Then, surprisingly, he laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "Stand down, boys," he called to his men. "Seems I've underestimated our visitors." The men hesitated, clearly reluctant to surrender. "I said stand down," Reed repeated sharply. "No sense in dying over this." Slowly, grudgingly, the men lowered their weapons. "Kick them away," Vaughn instructed, never taking his eyes or his knife from Reed. Once the men had complied, Vaughn addressed them directly. "Here's what's going to happen. Your boss is coming with us to face justice for what he's done. Anyone who interferes will join him in a cell or a grave, your choice." One of the men, younger than the others, with a patchy beard and nervous eyes, spoke up. "What about us? We was just following orders. You burned independence," Willow said, anger coloring her voice. "Killed innocent people." "We didn't kill nobody," the young man protested. "Orders was to start fires on the west side, drive folks east. Anybody who died wasn't supposed to." Reed hissed a warning. "Shut your mouth, Parker." "No," Vaughn said, pressing the knife closer to Reed's throat. "Let him talk." "Who gave those orders, Parker? Who hired Reed?" The young man looked from Reed to Vaughn, clearly terrified. "Mr. Hollister, from the cattle company. Said we was just supposed to scare people, make 'em sell their claims. Didn't say nothing about killing." "Hollister," Vaughn repeated, a grim satisfaction in his voice. "Got a first name?" "Edmund," Parker supplied. "Edmund Hollister has an office in Bridgeport." Vaughn nodded. "Willow, get some rope from the stable. We're tying these men up." Under Vaughn's watchful eye, Willow secured each of Reed's men with rope from the stable, binding their hands behind their backs and tying them to the porch railing. Reed himself received special treatment, hands and feet bound, a gag in his mouth to prevent him from issuing any further orders to his men. "What now?" Willow asked as they stepped away from the secured prisoners. "We take Reed to the marshal in Bodie," Vaughn replied. "Along with Parker there, who seems willing to testify. Should be enough to get warrants for Hollister and the others." "And what about the rest of these men?" she asked, gesturing to the bound outlaws. Vaughn considered them dispassionately. "They'll keep till we send someone back for them. Without Reed calling the shots, they're just hired guns." They worked quickly to extinguish the small fire in the stable, then prepared to depart. Vaughn saddled one of Reed's horses for the outlaw leader, securing him to it in a way that allowed him to ride but not escape. Parker, who seemed increasingly eager to cooperate, was permitted to ride with his hands tied to the saddle horn. As they prepared to leave, Willow approached the remaining men. "The people of Independence didn't deserve what you did," she said, her voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath her words. "Remember that while you're waiting here. Remember the faces of the people whose lives you destroyed." She turned away without waiting for a response, mounting her own horse. Vaughn gave her an approving nod, and together they rode away from the lodge, Reed and Parker in tow. The journey to Bodie took 2 days of hard riding. They stopped only when necessary, camping rough and keeping constant watch over their prisoners. Reed remained sullenly silent, while Parker proved increasingly talkative, providing details about Hollister's operation and the various jobs Reed and his men had performed for the cattle company. By the time they reached Bodie, Willow was exhausted but determined. The mining town bustled with activity, its main street crowded with wagons, miners, and the usual assortment of frontier characters. They drew curious stares as they rode directly to the marshal's office, their disheveled appearance and bound prisoners creating quite a spectacle. Marshal James Sullivan, a grizzled veteran of both the Mexican and Civil Wars, received them with suspicious curiosity that transformed to respectful attention when Vaughn presented his federal warrant and explained their story. "Reed's been on our watch list for years," Sullivan acknowledged, examining the warrant. "But this business with the cattle company and burning settlements, that's new information." "We have a witness," Vaughn said, nodding toward Parker, "willing to testify about Hollister's involvement." Sullivan stroked his gray beard thoughtfully. "That changes things. I can hold Reed on the federal warrant, but for Hollister, we'll need the circuit judge. He's due next week." "We'll wait," Vaughn decided, exchanging a glance with Willow, who nodded her agreement. Reed was secured in Bodie's jail, along with Parker, though the latter was housed separately as a cooperating witness. Sullivan insisted Vaughn and Willow join him for dinner at the town's best restaurant, an establishment called the Golden Rule that offered surprisingly good food for a mining town. Over steaks and potatoes, Sullivan asked the question Willow had been dreading. "So what happens to independence now?" She placed her fork down carefully. "What do you mean? Town's gone from what you've said. Most survivors scattered. Rebuilding won't be easy, especially with the cattle company still hovering." "Hollister will face justice," Vaughn interjected firmly. "Once he's arrested, the company might back off." Sullivan looked skeptical. "Maybe, or they might send someone else. These big Eastern outfits are persistent when they want something." Willow felt a cold weight settling in her stomach. The marshal's words forced her to confront a reality she'd been avoiding. Independence might truly be gone forever. Her plans to rebuild suddenly seemed naively optimistic. Sensing her distress, Vaughn changed the subject, asking Sullivan about the circuit judge and what to expect at the hearing. The conversation turned to legal matters, allowing Willow to regain her composure, though her mind remained troubled. After dinner, they checked into Bodie's hotel again, taking separate rooms to maintain propriety. Willow stood at her window, looking out over the bustling mining town, so similar to what Independence had been. Lives being lived, businesses thriving, people planning for futures that could be destroyed in an instant by men like Reed and Hollister. A soft knock at her door roused her from these dark thoughts. She opened it to find Vaughn standing in the hallway, hat in hand. "May I come in?" he asked. "Just to talk," he added hastily, aware of the impropriety of the request. Willow hesitated, then nodded, leaving the door partially open as was proper. Vaughn entered, remaining standing as she took a seat on the room's single chair. "I wanted to see how you were holding up," he said, his usually stern expression softened with concern. "I'm fine," she replied automatically. Vaughn raised an eyebrow. Sullivan's words hit hard, about independence. Willow sighed, abandoning the pretense. "He's right, isn't he? Even if we stop Hollister, there's no guarantee the company won't try again. And who would return to rebuild? Most survivors have probably started new lives elsewhere by now." "Probably," Vaughn agreed gently. "But that doesn't mean you can't start over too." "Where?" she asked, the question that had been haunting her finally voiced aloud. "Independence was all I knew. My father's store was my livelihood, my home." Vaughn was quiet for a moment, studying his hat as if it held answers. Finally, he looked up, meeting her eyes directly. "Come to Colorado with me." The suggestion caught her completely off guard. "Colorado? After this is done, after Reed and Hollister face justice, I'm heading back to Denver. I still own land there. Good land, near a growing town." Willow stared at him, trying to process what he was suggesting. "Are you offering me a job, Mr. Valentin?" A faint smile touched his lips. "No, Miss Porter, I'm offering you a future." The simple statement hung in the air between them, laden with implications neither was quite ready to articulate. "Why?" she asked finally. "You barely know me." Vaughn set his hat on the dresser and took a step closer, still maintaining a respectful distance. "I know enough. I know you're brave and determined. I know you don't back down when things get difficult. I know you can shoot straight and ride all day without complaint." His voice softened further. "And I know that in 3 days on the trail with you, I've felt more alive than I have in the 2 years since Joe died." Willow's breath caught in her throat. "Vaughn, you don't have to answer now," he said quickly. "Just think about it, please." Before she could respond, he retrieved his hat and moved toward the door. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be busy." After he left, Willow sat motionless, her mind reeling from his unexpected proposal. Colorado. A new start. With Vaughn. The thought was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. She had admired his courage and determination from the moment he stood beside her in the ruins of Independence. Over the days that followed, that admiration had deepened into something more complex: respect, trust, and yes, attraction. But was that enough to build a future on? Sleep eluded her as she wrestled with the decision, weighing the pull of the familiar against the promise of the unknown. By dawn, she was no closer to an answer. The next week passed in a blur of activity. Official statements were taken, telegrams sent to various law enforcement agencies confirming Reed's crimes in their jurisdictions. Parker's testimony was recorded in detail, providing a damning account of Hollister's role in orchestrating the destruction of Independence and other settlements. Through it all, Vaughn was a steady presence at Willow's side, never pressuring her for an answer to his proposal, but making it clear through small gestures that his offer stood. A cup of coffee appearing when she needed it most, a steadying hand under her elbow when fatigue threatened to overwhelm her, quiet words of encouragement before particularly difficult testimonies. When Circuit Judge Hamilton finally arrived, the town of Bodie buzzed with anticipation. The case had become something of a sensation, with newspapers as far away as San Francisco sending reporters to cover the proceedings. Willow found herself thrust into an unexpected spotlight as the brave young woman who helped capture the notorious Harlan raid. The hearing itself was surprisingly brief. Raid, faced with overwhelming evidence and multiple witnesses, surprised everyone by pleading guilty, a tactical decision, Vaughn explained, to avoid trials in multiple jurisdictions. Judge Hamilton sentenced him to hang, the execution to be carried out in 1 month's time. More significantly, based on Parker's testimony and supporting evidence, the judge issued a warrant for Edmund Hollister's arrest on multiple charges of conspiracy to commit murder, arson, and fraud. Marshal Sullivan deputized a posse to ride immediately for Bridgeport to serve the warrant. "Would you like to go with them?" Vaughn asked Willow as they watched the posse depart. "See it through to the end," she considered the question, then slowly shook her head. "No, I've seen enough violence. Knowing justice will be done is enough for me now." Vaughn nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Then what's next for you, Willow Porter?" The moment of decision had arrived. Willow took a deep breath, looking out at the dusty streets of Bodie, then back to Vaughn's weathered face. "I hear Colorado is beautiful in the summer," she said quietly. The transformation of Vaughn's expression was remarkable, the stern lines easing, his blue eyes lighting with a joy she hadn't seen before. He reached for her hand, then seemed to remember they stood on a public street and let his arm drop. "It is," he confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. "Especially the area around Denver. Good farmland, room to build. Room for a store, perhaps?" Willow suggested. "I am a shopkeeper's daughter, after all. It's what I know." "The town could use a good general store," Vaughn agreed, a smile tugging at his lips. "Growing community, families moving in." They began walking back toward the hotel, their steps naturally falling into rhythm together. "When would we leave?" Willow asked. "After Hollister's dealt with," Vaughn replied. "Want to see that through. Then east before winter sets in. Could be in Denver by September." September. 3 months away. Time enough to prepare, to adjust to the idea of leaving California behind. Time enough, perhaps, to better understand the connection forming between them, this unexpected bond forged in fire and pursuit of justice. "I should write to my mother's sister in Sacramento," Willow mused aloud. "Let her know I'm safe and where I'm going." "Of course," Vaughn agreed. Then more hesitantly, "Willow, about Colorado, I want to be clear about what I'm offering." She stopped walking, turning to face him. "Yes, I'm not just offering land or opportunity," he said carefully. "I'm offering partnership. If you want it, if not, the land offer stands regardless. No obligations." Willow felt her cheeks warm under his direct gaze. "What kind of partnership did you have in mind, Mr. Valentin?" A hint of the smile she was coming to treasure appeared. "The kind that starts with courtship and, if agreeable to both parties, progresses toward something more permanent." Despite the formal language, the meaning was clear. Willow found herself smiling back, a genuine smile that felt strange after the grief and tension of recent days. "I believe I would find such an arrangement not disagreeable," she replied, matching his formal tone though her eyes conveyed a warmer message. Vaughn's smile broadened. "Then I shall look forward to courting you properly, Miss Porter, once our business here is concluded." They continued walking, a new awareness humming between them. As they reached the hotel, Willow paused at the entrance. "Vaughn," she said softly, "thank you for everything, for being there when everyone else was gone." He removed his hat, holding it over his heart in a gesture of sincerity. "I told you we'd start counting from 2. Meant it then. Mean it now." The simple words carried the weight of a promise one Willow believed he would keep. 2 weeks later, they stood on the platform of Reno's train station, tickets to Denver in hand. The intervening time had brought news of Hollister's arrest and indictment, along with several of his business associates. The Bridgeport Cattle Company had been placed under investigation by federal authorities, its land-grabbing operations suspended indefinitely. More personally significant, the survivors of independence had been located in various settlements throughout the region. Most had indeed started new lives and had little interest in returning to the ruins of their former home. But they expressed gratitude upon learning that those responsible for the destruction would face justice, and many sent letters of thanks to Willow for her role in making that happen. With independence truly behind her, Willow had embraced the future that lay ahead. The train journey would take them through stunning landscapes and bustling cities before delivering them to Denver, where Vaughn's property awaited 160 acres of good land with a small but sturdy cabin, just a few miles from a growing settlement. "Ready?" Vaughn asked as the train pulled into the station, steam billowing around the platform. Willow adjusted her new traveling hat, a purchase Vaughn had insisted on, saying a lady traveling to Denver should look the part. "Ready," she confirmed, surprised to find it was true. As they boarded the train and found their seats, Willow couldn't help but reflect on the strange journey that had brought her here. Just weeks ago, she had stood in the ashes of her home, believing everything was lost. Now she sat beside a man she was coming to care for deeply, heading toward a future bright with possibility. The train lurched forward, gathering speed as it pulled away from the station. Beside her, Vaughn reached over and tentatively took her hand, a gesture both protective and affectionate. Willow laced her fingers through his, no longer concerned with the propriety that had governed their interactions in Bodie. "You know," she said thoughtfully, watching the Nevada landscape begin to slide past their window, "when I said everyone's gone that day in Independence, I truly believed I was alone in the world." Vaughn's fingers tightened around hers. "And I meant what I said. We started counting from 2 that day, and the count only goes up from here." As the train carried them eastward toward their new beginning, Willow Porter smiled. From the ashes of independence, something unexpected had emerged, not just justice or closure, but the promise of a future counted together, one day at a time. The journey to Denver took 6 days of travel through ever-changing landscapes, the stark beauty of Nevada giving way to Utah's red rock formations. Then the soaring Rocky Mountains as they entered Colorado territory. Throughout the journey, Vaughn proved to be an attentive companion, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of his earlier travels through these regions. For Willow, who had never ventured far from Independence, Each new vista was a revelation. By the time they reached Denver, she had filled a small notebook with observations and sketches, a record of her first great adventure. Denver itself surprised her with its size and energy. Though still raw in many ways, the city boasted substantial brick buildings, busy streets, and all the amenities of civilization. After the quiet of independence, the bustle was both overwhelming and exhilarating. "It's grown since I was last here," Vaughn remarked as their carriage navigated the crowded streets from the train station. "Gold and silver mines bringing people from everywhere. Is your land far from here?" Willow asked, trying not to gawk like a provincial as they passed an impressive 3-story hotel. "About 12 miles east," Vaughn replied. "Good farming country. Close enough to bring goods to market, far enough to avoid city troubles." They spent that night at a respectable hotel in Denver, again maintaining separate rooms as befitted their unmarried status. The next morning, Vaughn hired a wagon to transport them and their belongings to his property. As they left the city behind, the landscape opened into gently rolling plains, dotted with farms and homesteads. The September air carried the crispness of approaching autumn, though the sun still warmed the day pleasantly. "There," Vaughn said finally, pointing toward a stand of cottonwood trees in the distance. "Home." As they drew closer, Willow could make out a small cabin nestled among the trees, a barn nearby, and beyond them, acres of open land stretching toward distant mountains. The simplicity of it struck her so different from the cramped mining town she'd known, yet somehow immediately appealing. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. Vaughn's expression softened as he gazed at the homestead. "Been a while since I've seen it. Neighbors been looking after things." When they reached the cabin, Willow was pleasantly surprised. Though small, it was sturdily built and clean, with 2 rooms, a main living area with a cookstove and table, and a smaller bedroom. A covered porch wrapped around 2 sides, offering shade and a place to sit and view the surrounding countryside. "It's not much," Vaughn said, watching her reaction carefully. "But there's room to expand. Maybe add another bedroom, extend the porch." Willow turned to him, seeing the uncertainty in his eyes, a rare vulnerability in this otherwise confident man. "It's perfect," she assured him. "A wonderful place to start." His relief was palpable. "I've arranged for you to stay with the Hansons, my neighbors, until we sort out arrangements. They have a daughter about your age." The consideration touched her. Though they had grown close during their travels, both understood the need for propriety, especially in a new community where reputations would matter. The Hansons proved to be welcoming Magnus and Ingrid, immigrants from Sweden who had settled in Colorado 5 years earlier, and their daughter Linnea, who immediately took Willow under her wing. Their farm adjoined Vaughn's property, making it convenient for the courtship that officially began once they were settled. True to his word, Vaughn courted her properly. He called at the Hanson farm on Sunday afternoons, taking Willow for walks around his property, discussing plans for expansion, and gradually sharing more of himself than he had during their journey west. She learned about his childhood in Pennsylvania, his service during the Civil War, and his decision to become a lawman afterward. He spoke more freely about his former partner Joe, the friendship they had shared, and the guilt he still carried over his death. In turn, Willow shared memories of her father, her mother who had died when she was young, and her dreams for the future, including her desire to open a store in the nearby town of Riverside, which served the surrounding farms but lacked a proper general goods establishment. "That land on the corner of Main Street is for sale," Vaughn mentioned one October afternoon as they walked along a creek that ran through his property. "Good location for a store," Willow looked up at him, surprised. "You've been inquiring. Might have asked around," he admitted. "Thought it could be a good investment, if you're interested." The thoughtfulness of the gesture, his support for her independence, even as their relationship deepened, confirmed what she had come to believe. Vaughn Valentin was a rare man, one who saw her as a true partner rather than a possession. By November, with winter approaching, Vaughn broached the subject that had been hovering between them. They sat before the fire in his cabin, having enjoyed a dinner. Willow had prepared her first meal cooked in what might someday be her kitchen. "I've been thinking," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant. "A dangerous pastime," she teased gently, setting aside her coffee cup. A smile touched his lips briefly before he continued. "Winter's coming. Construction on the store will have to wait till spring. But there are changes we could make here, to the cabin." "What kind of changes?" Willow asked, though she suspected she knew where this conversation was leading. "That addition I mentioned. Another bedroom, bigger kitchen." He paused, then added with deliberate casualness, "Of course, such changes would only make sense if you were planning to live here. Permanently." Willow felt her heart quicken. "Are you asking me something, Vaughn Valentin?" He met her gaze directly, all hesitation gone. "I'm asking you to marry me, Willow Porter. To build a life here together." Though she had anticipated the proposal, the reality of it, the sincerity in his blue eyes, the quiet certainty in his voice moved her deeply. "I would be honored," she replied, her voice steady despite the emotion tightening her throat. Vaughn crossed to her chair and knelt beside it, taking her hands in his. "I know it hasn't been long, some might say too soon, but life's taught me not to waste time when you're certain." "And you're certain," she asked, "about you?" "Yes." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small gold ring set with a modest diamond. "Belonged to my mother. I'd be proud for you to wear it if you will." Willow extended her hand, allowing him to slip the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if meant for her all along. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Vaughn rose, drawing her up with him. For a moment they stood facing each other, the firelight casting a warm glow over their features. Then, with a gentleness that belied his strength, he pulled her into an embrace and kissed her, their first kiss, but one that carried the promise of many to follow. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Riverside, with the Hansons and a handful of Vaughn's friends from Denver in attendance. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, the celebration afterward warm and filled with good wishes for their future. That night, as husband and wife, they returned to the cabin that was now their shared home. What transpired between them was both the culmination of the connection that had been building since that first meeting in the ruins of Independence, and the beginning of a deeper bond, one forged not just in attraction, but in mutual respect and understanding. Winter settled over the Colorado plains, bringing snow that transformed the landscape into a glistening white expanse. Despite the cold, the season was one of unexpected contentment for the newlyweds. Isolated by weather but comfortable in their snug cabin, they established the rhythms and routines of married life. Vaughn worked on interior improvements to the cabin, building better shelving, crafting a larger table for the kitchen, planning the spring addition. Willow created a home from what had been a bachelor's functional space, adding touches that made the cabin feel truly theirs. In the evenings, they would sit before the fire, sometimes reading aloud from books Vaughn had accumulated over the years, sometimes simply talking about their days or their plans for the future. Occasionally, they would lapse into companionable silence, each content in the other's presence. It was during one such quiet evening in late January that Willow broached a subject that had been on her mind. "I received a letter from Marshal Sullivan today," she said, looking up from her needlework. Vaughn glanced up from the ledger where he had been calculating expenses for the store they planned to build in spring. "Oh, what news? Reed was hanged last month as sentenced," she reported, "and Hollister has been convicted. 20 years in prison." Vaughn nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Justice served, then. Does it give you peace?" Willow asked gently, "knowing they've been punished for what they did?" For Joe, he considered the question, staring into the fire. "Some," he admitted finally. "Not complete peace, maybe, but enough to move forward without looking back so much." Willow set aside her sewing and moved to sit beside him on the small sofa they shared. "I've been thinking about independence a lot lately," she confessed. "Not with the same anger or grief, but differently." Vaughn put his arm around her shoulders, drawing her closer. "How so?" "If it hadn't been destroyed, I would never have left, never have met you, never have found this." She gestured to encompass not just their cabin, but the life they were building together. "From ashes, something new," Vaughn murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Something better, maybe." "Yes," Willow agreed, leaning into his embrace. "Exactly that." Spring arrived with a rush of activity. As the snow melted and the land awakened from its winter slumber, work began on both the cabin addition and the store in Riverside. Vaughn had purchased the lot they had discussed, and construction commenced under the supervision of a builder from Denver, following plans Willow had drawn during the winter months. By June, the store was taking shape, a sturdy 2-story structure with the shop below and living quarters above for whenever they needed to stay in town. Porter and Valentin General Goods, as the sign would read, was designed to serve the growing community of farmers, ranchers, and townspeople in the area. At the cabin, now properly a farmhouse with the addition of 2 bedrooms and an expanded kitchen, Willow planted a vegetable garden and began setting out fruit trees that would eventually provide both food for their table and produce to sell in their store. The summer passed in a blur of hard work and achievement. By August, the store was ready for its grand opening, coinciding with Riverside's Harvest Festival. The event drew people from miles around, curious to see the new establishment that promised to provide goods previously available only in Denver. Willow stood proudly behind the polished counter, greeting customers and answering questions about merchandise, while Vaughn handled the heavier items and managed the steady stream of deliveries from suppliers. By day's end, they were exhausted but exhilarated by the success of their venture. "You're a natural shopkeeper," Vaughn remarked as they closed up that evening. "Your father would be proud." Willow smiled, touched by his understanding of what this achievement meant to her. "I think he would," she agreed. "Though he might be surprised to find me doing it in Colorado rather than California." "Life takes unexpected turns," Vaughn observed, drawing her into a brief embrace before they headed upstairs to the apartment they would occupy that night rather than making the journey back to the farm. The success of opening day proved to be just the beginning. Over the following months, Porter and Valentin General Goods established itself as an essential part of Riverside, with Willow's keen business sense and Vaughn's practical knowledge of farming and ranching needs combining to create an establishment that truly served its community. They developed a routine 3 days a week at the store, the remaining time at the farm, where Vaughn had begun raising cattle on a small scale. It was a busy life but a fulfilling one, their partnership in business as harmonious as their marriage. As their first anniversary approached, Willow made a discovery that would change their lives once more. The persistent fatigue she had attributed to their hectic schedule, the occasional morning nausea she had dismissed as a passing ailment, these symptoms combined to tell a story she finally recognized. She chose a quiet evening at the farm to share her news, after they had finished dinner and settled by the fire in what had become their favorite end-of-day ritual. "I have something to tell you," she began, her voice a mixture of nervousness and joy. Vaughn looked up from his book, his expression immediately concerned. "Everything all right?" "More than all right," she assured him, taking his hand. "Vaughn, I'm going to have a baby in spring." His reaction was everything she could have hoped for: surprise giving way to wonder, then to a joy so profound it transformed his usually reserved features. He gathered her into his arms with a gentleness that belied his excitement, pressing kisses to her hair, her forehead, finally her lips. "A baby," he repeated when he could find words. "Our baby." "Yes," she confirmed, smiling through happy tears. "Our family is growing. We're counting higher, just like you said." The months that followed were filled with preparations, converting one of the new bedrooms into a nursery, arranging for additional help at the store, Vaughn expanding his cattle operation to provide for their growing family. Through it all, Vaughn's protectiveness intensified, though he was careful not to smother Willow's independent spirit. Spring arrived again, bringing with it new life in more ways than one. On a perfect April morning in 1877, after a night of labor during which Vaughn never left her side despite the midwife's suggestions that he wait elsewhere, Willow gave birth to a healthy son. "What shall we name him?" she asked, cradling the infant in her arms as Vaughn sat beside them on the bed, his expression one of awe as he gazed at his son. "Thomas," Vaughn suggested. "After your father." Willow smiled, touched by the gesture. "Thomas Joseph Valentin," she decided, adding the name of Vaughn's fallen partner as a middle name. Vaughn's eyes met hers, gratitude and love evident in their blue depths. "Perfect," he agreed, his voice rough with emotion. As their son grew from infant to toddler, their lives settled into a new rhythm. The store continued to prosper, now managed primarily by an assistant, while Willow divided her time between business and motherhood. Vaughn's small cattle operation expanded, providing a steady secondary income. Their family grew again with the birth of a daughter, Clara Elizabeth, in the summer of 1879. Watching Vaughn with their children, the former lawman now transformed into a gentle father who told bedtime stories and crafted tiny wooden toys, was a joy Willow never tired of. By 1885, 10 years after they had stood together in the ruins of independence, Willow and Vaughn had built a life that exceeded any expectations either might have had on that fateful day. Their farm had grown to include a proper orchard, expanded pastureland, and a new, larger house that Vaughn had built with the help of neighbors and hired hands. The original cabin remained, repurposed as a guest house for the occasional visitors from Denver or more distant places. Porter and Valentin General Goods had expanded as well, now occupying a larger building in Riverside and offering an impressive array of merchandise from farming implements to fine fabrics, medicines, to musical instruments. They had added a second store in a neighboring town, managed by a trusted employee but still under their ownership. Thomas, now 8, showed signs of his father's quiet strength and his mother's determination. Clara, at 6, was already developing the business sense that had served Willow so well. A third child, William, had joined the family 2 years earlier, completing what both Vaughn and Willow considered their perfect family. On a warm summer evening, as they sat on the wide porch of their home watching their children play in the yard, Willow reflected on the journey that had brought them here. "You ever think about independence?" she asked Vaughn, who sat beside her, his hand resting comfortably on hers. He considered the question, his gaze following Thomas as the boy demonstrated to his younger siblings how to throw a lasso. "Sometimes," he admitted. Not with regret anymore, just as the beginning of our story, Willow nodded, understanding perfectly. I received a letter last week, she said. From Mary Reynolds, the family I was delivering supplies to when the fire happened. They've settled in Sacramento, doing well there. Good, Vaughn said sincerely. Glad to hear it. She mentioned that some people have returned to independence, Willow continued. Not many, but a few. They're rebuilding slowly. The mines reopened under new ownership. Vaughn turned to look at her, a question in his eyes. Do you ever wish we'd gone back, tried to rebuild there instead of coming here? Willow shook her head without hesitation. Never. This is our home. This is where we were meant to be. She squeezed his hand. I thanked God every day for bringing you to me that day, even in the midst of such tragedy. Vaughn raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. I was just doing my job, following Reed. No, Willow disagreed gently. You were giving me hope when I had none. Then we'll start counting from 2, you said. And look how high we've counted since then. Vaughn smiled, the full, unguarded smile that had once been rare but now appeared regularly, especially when he looked at his wife and children. 5, he confirmed. And each one a blessing. As the sun began to set, painting the Colorado sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, their children ran up to the porch, eager to share their adventures and ready for the evening meal. Vaughn rose to sweep young William into his arms, while Willow listened to Clara's excited description of a butterfly she had seen. In that moment, surrounded by the family they had created and the home they had built, both Vaughn and Willow knew with absolute certainty that, from the ashes of independence, they had forged something far more precious than either could have imagined on that day when they began counting from 2.